Okay, so if you want to go ahead now.
Okay. So thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here to talk about this presentation called Battle of the Image Loaders, where I basically just compare some of the most popular image downloading libraries that are out there. Not all of them, but some of the ones that are widely used. Um, a little bit about myself. My name is Nelson Ramirez. I'm an Android developer. I've been working solely as an Android developer since about 2009. Worked with many different clients, including Nike, Verizon, A&E Networks, most recently Comedy Central and the NFL. Shameless plug. The Comedy Central app is out and released on Google Play 2 days ago. So please download it and give it a 5-star rating. I would greatly appreciate that. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's talk about image libraries and why do we even need them? Like, what are they good for? In Android, as many of you may know, loading images isn't very fun. There's no really simple ways to do it with the SDK. You only have certain things like async tasks and a couple of different HTTP libraries that aren't that great. So it becomes very tedious and very painful very quickly. And images are a really important part of a lot of apps these days. If you think back to a lot of your favorite apps, chances are that they're going to be very visually rich and contain a lot of images, and a lot of times those images are going to be coming from off the device. They're going to be remote. So another advantage that you get with image libraries is they simplify a lot of very tedious tasks that you have to do, and a lot of really, really, really smart and great folks have put out these amazing libraries out there for you to use to make your life easier, and to help you make your app not feel broken. So before we dive into the contenders, let's first talk about a little bit about what those tedious tasks are. Whenever you're pulling an image from a remote source off the network, there's just a lot of different little things that start to come into play that you need to take into account. First of all is threading. How do you download all of these images effectively on a background thread, and how do you get them back to your UI, and how do you orchestrate downloading several images at once, or long big lists of images, etc. Caching, how do you do HTTP caching? How do you do a persistence layer, meaning writing it to disk or writing it to a file, whatever. Memory caching, etc. Bitmap processing, what do you do with the images once they're in there? How do you manage the memory for that? How do you deliver it to your UI? How do you create a pre-caching strategy so that your UI feels more responsive? So there's very quickly just a simple act of downloading an image into your app becomes a whole big project unto itself. You're fine if you're maybe just downloading one of two images, but most of the time, especially with a content-heavy app, that's never going to be the case. You're going to be needing to download a whole lot of images at once, and trying to do your best not to anger your users by looking slow or choppy. It has to be smooth and beautiful, and that is our job. So let's talk about the contenders. These are the libraries that I took the time to evaluate and compare against each other. This is by no means an exhaustive list of image libraries out there. I do believe it's some of the more popular ones. A notable exception there is Volley isn't mentioned on here. At the time, I actually don't really have a good story of why I didn't include Volley on here, but you know, I just want you to know I didn't forget it. I just chose not to include it as a contender, and no real good reasons for that. Oh, sorry. So yeah, so the contenders are Ion, which is a library maintained by Kushik Duda. Picasso is probably one of the ones that's going to be most familiar to you. That is maintained by the folks at Square, headed by Jake Wharton of Action Bar Sherlock fame. There's also the Universal image loader that's maintained by Sergey Tarasevich. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And XL Image Utils, which is maintained or was maintained by this great company out in San Francisco called Extreme Labs, and headed by Jamie Halpert. So all of them coming from excellent developers and excellent companies. So rest assured that whatever you choose, you're going to be in good hands. So what did I do to compare these different libraries? The basic matchup here for me was just looking at basic features, looking at how fast each library was compared to the rest, how clean and how easy to use was their API. Very importantly, how did they handle memory? One of the most common problems that you run into when you are starting to download a bunch of images is the dreaded out-of-memory crashes. So memory usage becomes very important, so that's something that I looked at in detail. And I'm not going to go too much into the actual benchmarks against each other. This is a pretty short talk, so I don't think we're going to have too much time to get into the nitty-gritties, but I can speak to it if need be. And finally, just the versatility, just what bells and whistles do these different libraries have. For example, once you download the image, how easy is it to, say, do things like animate the image or transform it or scale it or apply a filter to it or do anything else that you might want to do on the UI side, and also how customizable can the API be just in terms of the request and how you tell the library to deliver the images for you. So stuff like that becomes pretty important depending on what you're doing. Okay, so first let's talk about Ion, and we're just going to break down each one of these libraries and just take a quick look at all of the different features that they have, and then we'll do a comparison and just see who wins at the end. So first up is Ion. Ion has a long list of features. It basically just Ion basically can be your entire backend client, not just your image downloader, which, by the way, is something that Volley does pretty similarly. It's sort of aiming to become sort of your whole backend system, meaning that it's going to provide HTTP client. It's going to provide parsing of many different types of files, commonly JSON. You're going to be able to grab any other type of files, of course, images. And this one with Ion, it supports JSON, so makes it very, very easy to consume stuff like JSON of a remote server. As you can see, there's just a ton of features that Ion has. Some of the notable ones are, the automatic cancellation is pretty nice. So while you're still, say, downloading a whole bunch of images and your user goes to another activity, handling that for you is pretty nice. Just being able to cancel all of the background tasks, or be smart enough to continue doing them, but gracefully handling the completion of those tasks without crashing your app. Is just a very nice thing that this thing could do. Some nice HTTP features that this has, is built-in caching, which used to be a big deal. Now with the latest APIs, that sort of comes built in. So not that impressive anymore, but before it used to be very nice to have it, because just the support in the SDK was not that great for it. Being able to read cookies is kind of nice. And again, Ion, it's sort of aiming to be just a complete package for you, so you get a big bonus out of it when you're loading the images. You also get a pretty robust backend client. So this again is just more and more and more features that it has. Not going to cover too much here, but it's just a lot more HTTP client features that it has. And that's pretty much the feature list for Ion. Next up is Picasso. So Picasso is probably one of the most popular out there. It's pretty widely used throughout. By a lot of developers. So definitely one worth talking about. So features with Picasso are pretty nice. The adapter downloads is just a nice built-in feature that it has. So adapter you use is automatically detected and the previous download is canceled is pretty nice. So just being able to, just the fact that I can manage that stuff for you, and you as a developer don't have to think about all of the different edge cases of how your adapter is going to interact with not just the life cycle and your user coming back and forth, and all sorts of things happening, and how you actually manage those requests. That feature alone, just being able to basically say load this image on your get view, it's just makes your life so much easier, and it's just great. So that's definitely one of my favorite features with Picasso. Just how it handles working with an adapter. It's just nice. Another nice bonus is the image transformations. You get some nice little fades from by default when you first load into an image view, which is always a nice thing to see. You can do a whole lot of different things with it, anything from scaling the image to animating it in to applying a color filter to turning it black and white, you name it. It's pretty nice. Common feature with all of these libraries, is support for placeholder images, so that your user can actually see something in place of the image while the image is loading. And this is this is nice because it helps you sort of prevent jerkiness in your list view as your user is scrolling and waiting for the images to come in. If you don't have a placeholder image there, it just, as the images come in, it resizes the view and your adapter starts, or your list view starts to get kind of jerky. So that's a nice solution for that. Being able to load from resources is nice as well. This allows you to just in your app just have a nice clean API where you do the requests for all of your different assets, whether they're coming from network or from resource, all through the same interface, which is a very good thing. Debugging indicators, that's just for logging. Not that exciting of a feature. I think there's a lot of other nice things that I actually didn't include in this slide about Picasso. Mainly that, out of all the APIs, I think Picasso is probably one of the cleanest ones to work with. It uses a builder pattern for setting up your image requests. It does give you a lot of flexibility to not just receive the not just receive the image on the UI side, but also work with the responses and drop in your own custom HTTP client if you need to. By default, this uses OKHTTP, which is a great HTTP library, which also provides very good caching and very seamless, transparent file caching, so a nice persistence layer for that, and also a very good HTTP cache that can be either backed by an LRU cache or set to a certain size memory-wise. So pretty nice stuff in there. I think slowly but surely Picasso has become one of my favorites, but I shouldn't be saying that since this is an objective comparison here. So moving on to the Universal Image Loader. So the feature for this guy, it's also just a very, very capable library. It handles multi-threading for image loading very nicely. A lot of nice options in terms of configuring the loads. So you can set the number of thread executors. You can set a custom decoder, or you can set up a custom disk cache. So very, very extensible, very, very gives you very good control over the inner workings of the library, which is very nice. If you're the type of developer that likes to tweak every single setting, this is definitely a very good option to go with. Gives you a whole lot of control over things while at the same time still working very well. Nice thing that I like personally about Universal Image Loader is the loading process. It gives you a nice set of callbacks where it sort of becomes a little similar to async tasks, but it does give you a whole lot more information as to what's going on with the request itself. So this allows you to provide a nice progress of your download, for instance, or lets you react to errors or whatever else you want to do. Whereas some of the other libraries are sort of hiding that from you and not really giving you a whole lot of insight as to what's going on. Um, Universal Image Loader actually does the opposite and just gives you a plethora of options, and ways to customize how it works. So things like that sometimes become important. Just you would never think it, but just sometimes you may want to know whether the image that just got delivered to you, you may be interested in knowing whether it just came from your disk cache or your memory cache, or if the library actually had to go and do a network request to give you that image. So with this, you basically have insight into all of that stuff. So great set of features with Universal Image Loader. Excel Image Utils. So this is a library by Extreme Labs. It's been quite some time actually since I last used it, and I haven't confirmed this, but I'm not sure if they're still maintaining this. I actually try to reach out to Jamie Halpert and ask him. By looking at their Git repo, it looks like they haven't updated it in quite some time. So I'm not sure what it means for the library itself, but even in its current state, it works really well, and I have used it in past production projects with great success. So one of the things that I like about Excel Image Utils, it's actually a feature that is not on this page. Maybe it's yeah, it's I think it's here. It's just the ability to auto scale in terms of memory usage. This library does a really good job of actually helping you out in optimizing the image, the display of your bitmap on the image view as much as possible, and it does this quite nicely and very seamlessly, while at the same time giving you a lot of great options on how to customize that. It's just as smart as Picasso in terms of dealing with adapters, so it can handle all of the life cycle changes that you could throw at it. It would basically be very, very difficult to get this library, or Picasso for that matter, to crash in any way while requests were being processed. They're just pretty solid, and you can use these libraries in your adapters and feel confident that at least the image loading part of it isn't going to break your app. So really good. Nice. My other favorite feature from Excel Image Utils is it gives you a couple of nice methods in its API to prefetch images, which becomes pretty useful when you're when you're showing long lists of images, for instance. So if you have just like a large gallery, and you're only displaying like the first 20 images, but you have 200. This gives you some nice utilities to start prefetching those other 200 images. So by the time you get to the last one, it will already have been on disk, and it'll just look that much smoother for your user. So that's a great feature there. Moving on. So again, so these are some of the you're probably starting to notice that there's some repeated features amongst the libraries. So placeholder image support, as I explained earlier, there's a good reason for that. Being able to load system files, or from assets, or from the file system is nice because it's just sort of gives you a unified way to request all of your UI assets. Great, great animation utilities with it. Personally, I like Picasso's a little bit better. I think they're easy, not easier to work with, but cleaner, I would say, to work with. For me personally, it's just a bit easier to understand stuff with Picasso, just in terms of animations and stuff like that. Okay, so now that we've covered all the features, we can talk about the actual head-to-head of these libraries. So what I did, and again, I'm not going to cover too much detail as to how I ran these comparisons, but I basically created a sandbox project that downloaded 200 images from the server, and I just did a lot of profiling on the performance of each library while downloading the same 100 images under, what I think are optimal network conditions. I ran the tests both within my local network, so there would be as little latency as possible, and off of a remote server as well, just to see if there would be a difference there. So I just I ran caliper tests, to test just performance of, just simple things like how fast, can each library actually download and, place on my adapter, these these couple hundred images. So just timing, how much memory was used, and that's about it really. I mean, it's not it's no scientific comparison, but it's good enough to get an idea of what does what. This, I'll confess that it's a little bit outdated, because I'm talking on this slide. I'm talking about ions connection pooling, and at the time when I first created this slide, they were the only ones that that library was the only one that really had that. But now that's been added into OKHTTP, and it's actually faster now than Ion. But so I apologize for the slightly out of date slide here. Okay, so moving on. I think I forgot to mention who the winner was here. Again, it would have been Ion, but I think it is now Picasso that does as good of a job. Okay, so the API comparison. How easy is this to? How easy is it actually to use these libraries? For the most part, with all of them, you're going to be doing a little bit of configuration. With Picasso, you don't. A lot of them, are designed to just work out of the box, and you have to do very little, and they just work. Others, you actually have to do quite a bit of setup to get stuff going. Universal image loader, like that's sort of the trade-off there, where because it's so open and it gives you so many options, you actually also do have to do a lot of configuration for it before you can actually get started with it. Whereas Picasso, nowadays it's just as simple as adding the one-liner in your Gradle build, calling the builder. Calling the Picasso via its builder, methods and telling it to load an image. That easy. So Picasso does a very good job of that. Ion follows a similar pattern. I personally think that Picasso has a much cleaner, so for the API, I give it to Picasso. Configuration, if you want to be able to get in there and basically change everything, I guess it's a good thing, to have all the flexibility. So Universal Image Loader is great. Universal Image Loader also gives you a lot of really nice dealing with your bitmaps, everything from setting the bit depth to specifying, how, the exact dimensions that you want this at, your image at, and being able to animate it and just do a lot of nice stuff. Callbacks, that's where that's where I can knock Picasso a little bit. With Picasso, you do have some good callbacks, but not as good as say Excel image utils or even ions. I think ions are by far the best in that regard. So that's sort of the breakdown for me as to how the APIs compare. They're all they're all pretty nice to use. I think my favorite, just in terms of simplicity, is going to be Picasso. So if I had to pick an overall winner for this category, it would be Picasso. Versatility. Again, this really depends on what your preference is. If you're a developer that just needs a whole lot of features, and maybe you're looking to, you want a solution that's also gonna, let you hit your REST services and consume your JSON, and comes with JSON built in and all that stuff. Ion by far is a great solution. That's not to say, since with excuse me, with the other libraries, you get similar features, but with Ion, you definitely just get a lot more of it. Volley is pretty similar. Volley is more designed to be sort of your back end request layer, which as a bonus gives you this networked image facility to download your images, but it doesn't go much beyond that. With Ion, you get that plus some really nice features for dealing with the images. So Ion is great in terms of versatility. The opposite point, of course, could be argued. Some people might argue that the simplicity of Picasso makes it more versatile because you could just drop it in and get working with it. And some people, think that's versatile, but whatever. So who's the overall winner? It really just depends on who you ask, and what your needs are, and what it is you need to do. Hopefully this talk gives you a little bit of background on everything that you have to think about when choosing your image loading library. But there's just there's no clear-cut winner, but there's an ideal library for every situation. So you just have to do your due diligence and really know what the requirements for your app are, and really just look for the features that you're most interested in and go with that. But if you want just a simple, easy-to-use library, the obvious choice is Picasso. With Picasso, you could just drop it in, give it the path give it the image view that you want it to load into, and you're done. It'll work at that simplest level, and of course it'll allow you to do much more. Yeah, Picasso is just a great option. If you want just a solid middle of the road library with a lot of useful features, that's gonna just handle image loading really well. Excel Image Utils is great. Again, as I mentioned, you get a lot of nice callbacks with it, a lot of pretty good options on customizing how your bitmap is processed, how stuff is loaded. You get a little bit of control over things like setting up the size of the cache, and you name it. Again, pretty good option. So next, if you want a really rich feature set and a lot of versatility, and you want to do stuff that with more than just images, the obvious answer there is Ion. You're sort of going to get this almost full-featured back-end client that's going to give you a good persistence layer, good memory caching, good HTTP caching on the other side, and is going to allow you to consume your web services in whatever format they're becoming in. So that's definitely a great option there if you need a lot of customization and you need a lot of control over what's happening without having to actually do all the terrible legwork of implementing the entire library. Also, same thing. If you want options and options and options, you remember the long list of features. If you just want options, Universal Image Loader is a good way to go. So that's pretty much it. I hope this was useful to you. I think we're gonna just probably do a little bit of a pause now, and we're gonna open it up to questions. So Luke, I give the floor back to you. Oh, there's a chat.
Okay, Nelson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hello?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So, thank you very much, Nelson. I think that was a good overview of all the different kind of image loaders. So, round of applause for Nelson.
Yeah, thank you for taking all the time to do that, original research, basically, that gets us information that can't get from anybody else, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I learned all this stuff the hard way by working with basically every single one of these and learning their strengths and weaknesses.
So did anybody have any questions, maybe any more detail about any of the stuff he talked about, or?
Okay, we could. Several.
How do these loaders compare to each other as far as file format support?
Could you hear that okay, Nelson?
Yes, that's a good question, and you know, a lot of them are going to be pretty similar. You know, they're going to handle you know, JPEGs and PNGs just fine. You know, you're not going to be able to work with a you know, with an animated GIF, for instance. But you know, they're all sort of all of these images are coming in as byte arrays. So you know, you know, how the images themselves are handled is just more about the capabilities, the native capabilities of Android to parse these byte arrays into, say, a JPEG or a PNG. But most of the standard web formats, with the exception of animated GIFs, are going to be just fine. Again, you know, things like Ion, you know, you're going to get some extra nice features, you know, of like automatic gzip encoding when you're requesting. So that's going to mean that the images are going to load faster. But you know, the trade-off there is that the decoding the image, decoding that byte array is gonna take longer and consume more memory, because now you have to first unzip it and then convert it into an image. But yeah, the image handling itself is basically just based on what Android itself supports.
What type of image loaders did he use in the Comedy Central app?
For the Comedy Central app, we use Picasso.
All throughout?
All throughout, yeah. We did not change it. The previous library that I worked with was XL Image Utils, and before that, Universal Image Loader. And I actually I worked with Ion, and I switched from Ion to Universal Image Loader on my TD Ameritrade app, and actually ended up settling on XL Image Utils because it provided some nice stuff with animation that I needed. So so yeah, I think just most recently I've been sort of favoring Picasso just because they keep adding features and it's very active and it just keeps getting better and better.
You mentioned that some of the different libraries were supported by JSON, or not JSON. Supported JSON. Do you remember which ones didn't? I mean, you didn't have it in your slides, so if you don't remember off the top of your head, that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's just Ion that has JSON built in. I think all of the other ones do not, as far as I can remember. I could be wrong on that, but I think off the top of my head, I think just Ion comes with it built into its library. For the most part, you know, actually, it might be Ion and Universal. Yeah, and Universal Image Loader might have it as well, but don't quote me on Universal Image Loader. Definitely just definitely Ion though.
Okay.
Is there any size limit for particular image?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Is there any size limit for image?
So he's asking about size limits. Have you ever run into a problem with really large images, I guess, or?
Because most of the time,
Yeah, the you know, the native bitmap decoder in Android has a hard limit of I think it's a 4,000 by 4,000 pixel image. And aside from that, system and post limit, it really just comes down to how much memory your device has available. Each one of these libraries is going to do whatever it can, but if it blows past its memory heap, it's going to do it. So I think the limitation is really just set by your device and by the system. The libraries are going to parse whatever you throw at them or attempt to, or die trying. So.
I'll ask a follow-up. Do any of the loaders, I think the answer is yes, but did any of them optimize for the case where you know how big the image view is that you're loading the image into? Do they do any sort of optimization as far as decoding that image?
Yes. XL Image Utils does that seamlessly. It will actually, before it decodes the bitmap, and actually I think Picasso does this as well, but I know for sure that XL Image Utils does it. Before it decodes the bitmap, it will look at the image view that it's destined for, and will try to actually grab dimensions out of it. If it has them, then it will before it decodes the image, it will actually set the bounds of that image view as the bitmap bounds, and it'll decode the image into that and then cache that for you. You can also specify default sizes in its configuration, and you can specify default sizes for certain types of requests as well. So the answer is yes. I think I've actually never looked at the source in Picasso, but I think I'm pretty sure that Picasso does it the same. I really just know more about the image utils doing that because it is actually something that it was actually a need that I had specifically, and Picasso didn't do it at the time I needed to do this, but I think they added it.
I had a question on licenses. Like, when you're developing for another client, and you want to make sure, have you run into any issues with any of them?
Most of these are open source under either what's it called, like the GPL.
I think I saw Apache 2 almost.
I'm sorry?
I looked at a couple of these. I saw Apache 2.0 license,
Yeah. So all of these are all going to be open source licenses. There's no proprietary anything. Usually the most you'll have to do is just give credits in your app, so just do acknowledgments somewhere in your app that you're using the library, which is just a polite and decent thing to do anyway, whether it's required or not. I've never had any problems. Like some of my apps have been downloaded by millions of users, and that's never been an issue.
Are any of these image loaders cross-platform?
Define cross-platform.
Working iOS and Android?
No, not as far as I know. I don't think so.
Was there a reason that? What was the reason Volley wasn't considered a contender?
It's just. Well, the biggest reason was at the time was just its poor documentation. I believe that has improved now, but one of the biggest things for me was, when evaluating Volley was just the first thing is, it didn't have Gradle support, so it was just kind of annoying to go and try to find the jar and bring it in. It wasn't in any of the Maven repos, which, by the way, all of these libraries, they all they're all in the public repos, so they do have Gradle support. So you could just add them into your project if you're using Gradle very easily. With Volley, that wasn't the case. So that was strike one against it in my book. Strike two was it just didn't seem very straightforward to get just a hello world working with it. Like if I have to spend more than 15 minutes trying to get something working, I get impatient and start screaming and cursing. So so yeah, just so that was pretty much the biggest thing. And then just also just the lack of documentation at the time. Again, full disclosure is I haven't looked at what their page looks like now, or if they've added some examples or whatnot. And I do hear great things about it. A lot of people do say fantastic things about Volley, and they really like it. And the last reason is really I haven't used it extensively myself, so I feel like it wouldn't be fair for me to talk about it in detail if I don't really know too much about it.
There's also a pretty good, if you're more interested in Volley, there's a pretty good discussion about it that I could try and dig up for you.
I just wanted to know why he filtered it first.
Okay, great. Yeah, that would be great.
So you mentioned memory footprint was one of the criteria while judging which image loader was the best. Can you talk a little bit more about it? Because I think I didn't see that in the slide.
I sort of heard the question. Could I talk a little bit more about what now?
The memory footprint, and you were asking more, just some more details on that, on I guess how much each one used,
How
or
is it a criteria to judge an image loader?
Okay, yeah, sure. Let me see if I can. Let me just really quickly here dig up my notes on that. 1 second. But off the top of my head, I think the memory-wise, I think the one that did the best there in terms of consumption was actually Excel image utils, and I think it was because of what I actually just mentioned earlier, how it would sort of seamlessly optimize the bitmap decoding to the image view that it was destined for. A lot of the other ones didn't do that, and as a result, they would actually decode the entire size of the bitmap rather than trying to shrink it down if it was smaller. So I think off the top of my head, it was definitely an Excel image utils that used the least amount of memory. And one of the reasons I switched from what was it? That I switched from Universal Image Loader over to Excel Image Utils was precisely that, because I did think that I did see that Excel Image Utils handled it better. Now again, nowadays, I would actually have to want to run the same benchmarks with Picasso, since they just continuously, so since they're so active in development with Picasso. But at that time, yeah, it was definitely Excel Image Utils. And as far as the memory usage for the 200, for the 200 image download, processing those images, they all came very close, by the way. I mean, they from their allocated heap, Picasso used 96% of the allocated heap. Universal Image Loader used 97.3%. So they were all pretty high. So I mean, they're gonna hog up your memory, and because these were also I should say that these were also all pretty large images. They were about 1 megabyte each. So I was downloading 200 meg. So yeah, the last one. Excel image utils came in at the lowest at 90. What's this number? All right, I'm trying to read my old handwriting here, and it's just terrible. Sorry. So yeah, around 96%. So all of them pretty high memory usage in terms of their heap. This was also running on an actual device. I was benchmarking this stuff on a first gen Nexus 7, which doesn't have a whole lot of memory available to begin with. So I thought it was pretty good hardware to run these types of benchmarks on. And performance and how fast they actually do it, I mean, that varies, but it's pretty difficult to control the network conditions because you'll have like bursts here and there that are not easy to control for. So yeah, hopefully that answered that question.
I had one more quick one. I was kind of in and out during the presentation. I don't know how much you talked about caching. Did you run any benchmarks on which ones were maybe more memory efficient there, or how configurable they were as far as caching? Because images can often be reused a lot in an app. So how does that play into kind of your evaluation?
Yeah, so I didn't run any benchmarks as far as how much, just how they perform in the different types of caching, but I can speak to just memory caching itself. All of them, well, Picasso doesn't actually give you any way to do any type of memory caching. Like Picasso just gives you a persistence layer, and you're kind of on your own as far as caching. I do think it. I'm sorry, no, that's a lie. You can actually configure an LRU cache for Picasso. It's built in. It's not really well exposed, but you can actually go in and configure it. And all of them do give you the option to set up your own LRU cache for it. So they're all pretty similar in terms of that. So you can, most of the times I've just used the built-in LRU cache that comes with the support library. Works pretty well. So I think, since they're all, like I've used those libraries using the same memory cache support, I would imagine that they all perform pretty similarly when it comes to that.
Okay.
I have one more question. Oh, so go ahead. Yes.
Well, I had one. So, since we know that the virtual machine has changed with Android L, so do these comparisons still remain valid with the new VM?
Can you repeat that question? I haven't.
I think it's related to art,
Yeah.
right? So the new runtime with Android. Do you think any of these would be affected? Would there be any significant changes there?
That's a great question. I don't know, but I'll tell you what I'll be doing in the next couple of days is what the answer to that is, because you just got me curious. Great question. I don't know, but I will find out.
I think that's a good place to stop, unless we have any additional questions.
Well,
Oh, go
for
ahead.
someone who's just now just got familiar with understanding, does it show on each of your links how to use the loaders? Instructions on
Like, is the documentation pretty good on all these?
Documentation on all of them is excellent. Yeah, I think there's also because they are pretty popular. You're going to be able to find a lot of examples. The guys at Square, always do a really great job with documentation and providing examples and sample apps and stuff. So if I had to pick a winner in terms of documentation, again, that goes to Picasso, but Ion has really great documentation as well. I think they all do a fairly good job of allowing you to get up and running pretty quickly. They give you all the basics that you need. And since they're all open source, their code is well commented, so that usually works well as well for documentation. But yeah, they're all pretty good, with Picasso being the best.
And we'll post a link with all of the with links to all of the libraries on the GDG Dallas page. So you don't have to worry about trying to write them down before you leave.
Okay. I'm just looking around to make sure that nobody else has anything burning that they want to ask. I think we're pretty good. Thank you so much, Nelson.
Okay, well, it was great doing this talk with you guys, and yeah, maybe next time it will be in person. But I enjoyed it, and I hope you find it useful.
That'd be great.
Right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.